Greetings, fellow Trekkies. You've beamed onto Build Series. I'm Ethan Alter from Yahoo Entertainment, and we're hosting Wilson Cruz, who plays Hugh Culber on Star Trek Discovery. Now, as you may remember, the good doctor died in Season 1, leaving his lover, Paul, played by Anthony Rapp, bereft. But as Spock has shown, death doesn't have to last forever on Star Trek. Hugh returns on this week's episode, which drops Thursday night on CBS All Access. We're going to talk to Cruz about his return to the Discovery, but first, let's watch a clip. Paul and Hugh reunited.
Yes, I can finally stop asking the question, answering the question. When are you coming back? So, yes, I'm thrilled. Well, if I can answer other questions.
Right, exactly. We can move on from there. Well, take me to your first day back on set. What was the first scene you shot? What was it like, sort of, without revealing, obviously, how it happens, but what was your memory of being back on set?
I'm trying to remember what my first scene... Oh, I do remember. What can I say? I don't want to ruin it. I think my first scene... was I can't root it. My first scene was when they actually try to get me back.
Right.
And that's all I can say.
And that's all, right, exactly. I like that. They get him back.
Right.
They try to get him back. That's the spoiler. But what was, after being gone for a little while, it's been a little while since you've been on the show, what was it like to see the cast again? Have you kept in touch with them since then? What was it like to just be back with them?
Oh, yeah. So, obviously I'd seen them during the run of the first season. And I went to Toronto early to shoot that scene. Mm-hmm. Later. So I didn't come when they were shooting the first episode, but I came while they were shooting the third episode. Mm-hmm. So I was there really early, and because I was growing my hair out and beard and stuff, which you'll see why when you see the show. More spoilers. And so I got to hang out, and then there was a lot of prep stuff. So, but we're very, very close, right? So we had been talking throughout, and I've known Anthony for over 20 years, and we had been talking in the months preceding when we started up again. So they're my babies. So.
As you do say, you come back looking slightly different. Hugh's a little more disheveled when we meet him again.
A little disheveled, yes.
How did you decide what he would look like? Did you come up with that look yourself? Did you work with the...
It was... we have the most incredible hair and makeup people, and they had a vision for it. They asked me to help them out with what I could naturally do myself. But we played around a bit with how much I was covered up, the length of the hair. The thing about so I have to edit myself as I go. He's been through, I'll just say this. He's been through a lot. He's been in this place for months. Mm-hmm. We have to remember that the Klingon War has been over for, I think, 9 months. So he's been in this plane for 9 months. And so there, are consequences. Right. And so we really wanted to make sure that people understood when you see him in that first moment what he's been through.
Right. Yeah, and it's safe to say when we see him again, the characters are shocked as the audience knows it's coming. The characters are shocked, and seeing Paul, especially Anthony Rapp, the way he reacts to seeing you again is such an emotional moment. I think. What was it? Was it like sort of playing that scene of sort of reuniting on screen for the first time?
First of all, I love working with that man. It's so easy between us because we have this rich history, and people are like, well, how do you create, a love relationship with someone who's a friend of yours? And I said, well, every love relationship should be based and founded on friendship and mutual respect and admiration. And we have that for each other in an overwhelming amounts. So to get to play that moment, there was a lot of pressure. There's a lot of anticipation because so much had been said in the months before during the season 1. So it's a lovely scene, and they wrote it beautifully, so it made it that much easier. And what a relief! And I really don't want to spoil it for him, but it was just really. We've had a few moments on this series, first and second season, where he and I look at each other and go, let's remember this. Let's remember this moment. The toothbrush scene was one of those. Our first kiss was another one, and this scene would be included in that.
I love the way that your personal history with Anthony really is felt in the show. You feel, without having to give us long backstory on Hugh and Paul, you just get this sense they've known each other and loved each other for years. And I think that's, especially on a show sometimes like Star Trek, where relationships have to be formed very fast. Like the sense of this history is really beautiful to watch, I think.
Yeah, and they've been together quite a long time. They're not married. I just want to make sure everybody knows that, because we get that question a lot. Maybe someday they will be, but they have been together for a very long time, and it was important for us to feel that, for people to understand that. And apparently they do, because they think we're married.
But it's a by choice thing. In the future, in this future,
yeah, we're keeping it loose. Right. We'll see what happens.
It's good to have that spontaneity, even that long.
Sometimes the spores take effect on us, and we dream about it.
Well, because of the history, and because that relationship is so strong, I know last season when Hugh was killed off, he was killed by Ash Tyler very viciously. But at the time, you talked about how you felt conflicted about that choice, because so often on sci-fi shows, in particular, it feels gay couples are often, one often dies. There's even a trope about it called "bury your gays." I think. And so dealing with that was that a difficult, as you expressed at the time, having to know that you had to play that scene yourself?
Yeah, it was a concern of mine right away. I have no control over what happens to the character, obviously. If I did, he'd be the captain. But I did have concerns, but they were, very quickly allayed, because I was told very quickly that I would be returning. And I actually did return in the very next episode briefly, and while shooting that very next episode, they let me know that I was coming back again in the episode after that. And while shooting that episode, they were like, "You'll be back next season, we just don't know how." Right. So my personal concerns about the bury your gays trope for our show were nil, because I knew what was happening. I completely understood the frustration of the audience, because they didn't have that information and I couldn't give it to them. So I just listened and smiled. And then they gave us the permission to let people know. And so we could have a conversation about the fact that on television, for the last few seasons, we have seen a massacre of LGBTQ characters on TV, especially women and especially people of color. And why is that important? Because we already feel unsafe in our lives, in our real life. To turn on the TV and to continuously see ourselves murdered with no consequence, and sometimes as if it didn't matter, is hurtful. And so I understood it. But I promise you, not only does Hugh return, but he returns in a bigger and better way. And this season, I think it's safe to say, and this is not, I don't mean this I don't mean to offend our writers in any way, but Hugh was in service of Paul Stamets's character. He was basically who Paul loved. In season 2, we get to know who Hugh is as a person, what his ambitions are, what his concerns are, who does he want to be, what are the consequences of what happened to him. So we get to learn that, and we get to learn that about this relationship as well. So I promise you, it's all good.
But I do imagine, you've described yourself as an actorvist, which is a great way to put it. And that is a situation where your activism and your career as an actor do butt up against each other, which is a hard position to be in.
Throughout my career, yes. I was when they called to tell me that the character was being killed off, I was actually working on 13 Reasons. It's my first day back on season 2. They had just done my makeup, and needless to say, they needed to do it again because I was distraught. But I had to get to work. I went back to work, and then I dealt with the feelings. But before I could rev up the anger, they let me know very quickly. I didn't even have to say anything. They were like, "We know. Don't worry. There's a plan." So I trusted them.
Yeah. And that's where your activism does pay off, because they knew they had to get out in front of it and say, "Look, you are coming back."
Yeah, and we at the time had a openly gay showrunner who understood, all of those issues, and he just couldn't communicate it to me yet. And so I couldn't communicate it to anybody else.
It's a shame too that I think, and I wonder if you think part of the reason why the barrier gaze trope, especially it seems to afflict sci-fi, is I think science fiction as a genre has gotten so progressive on TV. The sci-fi shows in general tend to have the most diverse casts, the most LGBTQ friendly characters, but then unfortunately the demands of narrative storytelling, the axe has to fall somewhere, and it does seem weird that it's an unfortunate trend that it's those characters that are.
And that's the point. You know, it always feels like. Well, I'm not say always. It sometimes feels like those are the easiest people to kill. Mm-hmm. And in the world, it also feels that way. And that's what's painful.
But your return, I think it really is an emotional return for fans. I think it is. It feels earned when we do see you come back. I think, and again, without spoiling how it comes back, I thought something that struck me is that in the canon of Trek, obviously Spock famously returned from the dead, and the way he did it was through sort of a mental mind meld, with a bit of his mental personality with McCoy. I thought, again, without spoiling, I thought what was interesting about your return is that it accesses an emotional place. There's an emotional connection, and that sort of speaks to the divide between the human characters in Starfleet and someone like a Vulcan, where it's all logic. So it's a very smartly chosen return, I think.
Yes, and you know, Hugh is an empath. You know, he is an incredibly vulnerable person who, you know, his humanity is deep, and what he experiences while he's away is hard. It's difficult, and we don't just tie it up with a neat little bow this season. It's not like he's back. There are consequences, as there would be, and I'm proud of the show for really following it through, and also it gave us, Anthony and I, something really lovely to play and really important. I think, you know, that this relationship was taken seriously, that it wasn't just about, you know, this cute couple, that this was a real relationship and that we were going to delve into some real issues here. Right.
Kirsten Bayer wrote this particular episode. I know she has major Trek cred. She knows the history of Trek really well. And did you talk to her at all about anything that you wanted in the script specifically for your?
Oh no, I knew my place, but once I had received the script, she and I talked about it at length. She was on set because, you know, the writers are in LA, but she came to Toronto. She was with me every moment of the way. I'm gonna cry because there were times it was really hard, and so everybody else had a lot of other things to focus on. They couldn't focus on, you know, my actory problems, but she really took the time and was there for me throughout it. So, and I just spoke to her when I saw the episode this weekend. We had a lengthy conversation about it, and I'm so grateful. I really am. I'm really grateful to her because she, like I said, took these people very, very seriously.
Yeah, and I love how seriously you clearly take Hugh and also just the world.
I love him so much.
I mean, this is you mentioned you're not necessarily a science fiction guy by norm. This is your first dab into it. What is it that you've learned? Second, right? but with a major franchise like Trek, what is it like sort of being part of it now? What have you discovered about being part of a show like Discovery for this genre?
That this fan base is deep and wide and passionate, and you know, they aren't afraid of letting us know, you know, what works, what doesn't work, and I think our job is to listen, and as long as you come to us in a respectful way, we are open to hearing that. And I think when you watch season 2, you realize that the producers and the network have also been listening to the fans. You know, I think all of us, the cast, the crew, the producers, are incredibly proud of what we've created this season. And I think we've finally got what Discovery is. I think we've finally, we are presenting to you the show that we've always wanted to make. It's not called Discovery by accident. These people are on a journey of discovery, and especially Hugh now. So I love going to the conventions. I love meeting people. I'm moved when people travel thousands of miles to come and see me at AOL Build from Germany, which is crazy to me, but I love you for it. you know, we have them in mind when that camera is rolling. Of course we do. We make this show for them, and we want them to love it and have opinions, and be moved by it, and be inspired by it, really.
Well, speaking of fandom, you're part of another major fandom, which is My So-Called Life, I think. And that turns 25 this year, this September, which is an amazing milestone. I mean, and that show has just endured. It's one I remember watching when it first came on and how important it was to me at that age and for all teenagers of a certain age. I mean, 25 years later, looking back on it now, is there one particular memory that stands out about your time on that show?
Oh my gosh.
I know. That's the hard one, right?
I could never, ever narrow it down to one moment. It literally changed me. I mean, plucked out of obscurity. I spoke to Whitney Holzman this weekend about it. We had a whole conversation about it. My favorite memory, as an actor, probably the I can't talk about the show without crying. This is why I'm an actor. My favorite memory as an actor shooting that show was the episode in which Ricky is kicked out of his home. Mainly because it helped me deal with my own parallel story. And so I could walk through that, experience that, and leave it there. And it was incredibly cathartic. And healing. You know, my father and I didn't speak. Weren't speaking when we shot that. But we started speaking once he saw that episode. So, as an actor and as a son, that's my favorite memory.
It's amazing that show has the power to, I think, transformed opinions in a lot of ways. Ricky was the first openly gay teenager character on a major network show, I believe, and you were the first openly gay actor to play that. So the representation at the time must have been, I can't imagine how freeing it was to recognize that, but also be hit with people who didn't understand either, being able to change people's minds.
I was aware, you know, of how important it was, mainly because, you know, I was 19, 20 years old when we shot it. And I had just come out of being a teenager. So I was aware of how important it would be to me, how important it would have been to me to see that character on television. You're like Barbara Walters all of a sudden. So I understood it, but I didn't really grasp how important it was to people until many years later, because most of the people who were affected by that character were living in shadows. You know, they were teenage boys and girls who were questioning their sexuality and saw that character and thought, I kind of understand who that person is, but couldn't come to me in public and say that, because owning that in that moment would be asking a lot of a young person. So it wasn't until I was like 20, 21 years old, 25 years old, after those people had grown up a bit, and I saw them at the club, and they'd come up to me and start saying these unbelievably personal and moving stories about how they would watch the show. The most famous example of that is Jussie Smollett. Who talks about, you know, opening up Tiger Beat and hiding in the bathroom, reading it by himself. So the fact that I could be some inspiration to that kind of human being who is such a gift to us now is a point of pride.
Have you reached out? Have you talked?
I saw Jussie last week. Right. Yes, right. We're friends. Yeah, and I love you. That's it.
No, have you thought about? You mentioned talking with Winnie recently. Do you still live with Ricky? Do you think about where he is now at all?
I am on Star Trek Discovery, and I'm on a number of I've done many things. I might do other things after this is over, but I will always be Ricky Vasquez. I carry him around. So I think about him a lot, yeah. And I've played the game of like where he is and what he's done, and I think he turned into a force, probably, yeah. I think I don't think anybody who goes through that. He was this kid who kind of lived in between worlds, right? He was of mixed race. Mm-hmm. He was, for most of that series, unsure of his sexuality and questioned everything. Didn't ever really fit in. And the kind of vulnerability and humanity that could teach a person, that it forces you to teach. Mm-hmm. It forces to teach you, I think would create an amazing human being. And he was an artist. Right. And I think he was starting to discover that. And we probably would have seen a lot more of that had the show continued. Yeah. But yeah, I think about him a lot.
I like to think he's an activist as well. And that,
yeah, probably, yeah.
Well, we have some questions from Twitter. We're going to start with a question from The Treester. I know that one of the storylines for Disco this season is faith in science. Through your character, have you discovered anything new about your beliefs in relationship to those ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be difficult for me not to ask those questions playing a person who is living in some nebulous plane, right? And real questions of life and death, and what does that mean, and where do we go, and the destruction and creation of energy, which is what we are. We know that you cannot destroy or create energy. So if that's true, which it is, what does that mean for us, and where does that energy go, and how does it reappear if it does? So yeah, I'm not a part of a formed religion. I don't consider myself Catholic anymore or anything, but I believe in the mystery of the universe. I believe that I don't know everything. And I wouldn't be arrogant enough to say that I did. I think there are things that I won't know, or that any of us will know, until we leave this plane and move on to the next. But I am open to all of the gifts that the universe has in store for me and for all of us. And if anything, this story has helped me understand that we may not always get what we want when we want it, but we get what we need. And I think Hugh needed to go through this in order for him to discover more about himself.
I love that faith has always been central in a lot of ways of Star Trek. A lot of episodes have explored that, and series have explored that. It's nice to see Discovery picking up that baton.
Absolutely,
I think it's always been part of the.
Yeah, and there's always it's always been fascinating to delve into that fine line between faith and science. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a wealth of material to delve into.
Right, absolutely. We have some questions from the audience as well. Right over there.
Hey, Wilson. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you. My question is, well, first, thank you. Congrats on all your successes, and thank you for always being such an amazing voice and example for a lot of us. It's incredible to see and to share your emotions. It's very special.
Because I'm a crybaby.
And I am too, so I'm holding it back big time. But my question to you is that when you're between these successes and in a show getting picked up for season and so on and so forth, what do you do to keep yourself motivated creatively? Or what do you recommend others to do that's not even industry related to stay connected so you can dive into these characters, so you can answer these questions?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I do a number of things because I have known unemployment many, many times in these 25 years. And what I've done personally, I mean, I would hesitate to tell anybody how to create their lives, but what I did was I knew that I needed to feel useful in the world. And if that meant doing something creatively, great. But if it could also include being of service to communities that I feel strongly about, then that was a road that I was willing to go to walk down. But I do think that as artists, you need to feed that spirit, and so I looked for opportunities to be creative in places that were not obvious. So 99-seat theaters, short films, student films, if I had to. You have to exercise the muscle. It's, your creativity needs to be fed or it will starve. But I also think that you have to live your life, that your life is the fuel that provides the energy for your creativity. So in those times when we're unemployed, we're still working. We're still working on our lives. And what we use in our work, all we can call upon is what we know and what we've experienced. And that only comes if you live your life as fully and completely as possible. So I think it's about being present. It's about being of purpose and of exercising. I think if you do those three things, you will feel satisfied and also be prepared for when the opportunity shows itself. This came out of the blue. I mean, literally, this and 13 Reasons Why. I hadn't really worked as for a while. I was working at GLAAD for 2 years. But I was still being creative and I was still exercising the muscle. And so when they called out of the blue and made these offers, I was ready to jump in. And that's our job. Thank you. That was a great question.
Thank you for the great answer.
Great. Another question?
Hi. So we've all seen the picture of your
Right.
return, so we
Yes.
can reference that.
Uh-huh.
So obviously this character's been through a lot, and it looks like he's gone through some big changes. So how has your approach to playing the character changed between season 1, where he was this very affable guy, to season 2, where he's clearly in some kind of distress?
How did I approach it?
Yeah, as an actor. So and how do you view the character? Like, what are the changes for you?
I did a lot of research on, I don't want to give a lot away, but on people who have dealt with PTSD and who've gone through traumatic experiences and how that has affected their return into their normal lives. There was that. I also started to think about, and I don't want to cry, right before the protease inhibitors came about, that saved and extended the lives of people living with HIV and AIDS, there were people who were facing death and knew or believed it was imminent. And so they lived their lives, they kind of just threw it all, caution to the wind, and then suddenly these drugs were available. And they were given a new lease on life, an extended amount of life. And so I really kind of meditated and thought about what that must have been like when everything was taken away from you, and including hope, and then suddenly given back to you. What does that feel like? And I know some people who have been through that. And the interesting thing that they said to me was, they literally had to rebuild their lives from the ground up and started to look at, well, is that life gonna work for me? Are the things that I felt and wanted and loved and needed and fed me before still the things that I need now, that I've been through that?
I feel like I've been through an emotional roller coaster. This is wonderful.
You're welcome.
Thank you. No, it's wonderful to see how open you are about talking about yourself and your characters and how much these parts mean to you and how much it shows how much you've
Well,
accomplished.
I just feel like, we've been given this really rich opportunity. I'm not going to speak for everybody. I know they feel this way, but I won't speak for them. I have been given this very rich opportunity. And there was a point right before I started working on here where I didn't think I was going to work as an actor anymore. So to be back in the saddle and given such rich opportunities, I'm not going to give away my shot.
There we go. You can drop the mic now, I think. Wilson's back in a huge way on Discovery starting tomorrow night. Tune in. It's a great season. It's a great episode. Great Valentine's Day episode, especially. CBS All Access, 8:30 p.m. Thank you so much to Wilson Cruz for coming today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.